Morning, everyone. Welcome to this terrific session. The space once filled. I think you're going to really enjoy hearing about what happened to Middle Hall, Alumni Hall, the Barracks, and of course, the Twin Oaks. I'm Ruth Benedict. I work in the Office of Advancement with the Annual Fund. My eldest granddaughter will be a senior at William Smith this year, so exciting days ahead. And I'd just like to introduce our speakers. I think you're going to really enjoy this. We had a little preview the other day. Tricia McEldowney is the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian for the colleges. She has a degree from the University of Toledo and Wright State University, and more than 10 years experience working in archives. She joined the colleges in 2017. Since moving to the Finger Lakes from Ohio, she's come to love the natural beauty of this region and being part of the vibrant and passionate HWS community. And I'd like to introduce Brandon Moblo. He's the archives technician for the colleges. He's originally from Michigan. He has a master's in history from the University of Vermont, and he joined the colleges in 2015. And before we start, I realized I skipped over my housekeeping. Just a few tips there. If you would, please keep your microphones muted to limit background noise. And feel free to put questions in the chat feature. We'll get to as many as we can. And at the end, any that we don't get to, we'll give you the archives email address. So I'm going to get out of the way so you can have a wonderful, enjoyable time. Tricia and Brandon.
All right, if you give me just a second here so I can get my presentation up and running and share it with all of you, because we have some wonderful, wonderful photos to share with you today. All right. I need to share my screen. Everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Brandon, can you see it? Are we getting it? All right. Well, to start off today, I want to thank you all again for attending. We are really, really excited to get Friday's presentations kicked off. And like Ruth said, Brandon and I are going to give a quick history of 4 buildings that were once a part of the HWS campus that no longer exist today. And it somehow seems oddly fitting to me that in a year where reunion can't actually take place physically on campus, we would present to you on 4 buildings that you wouldn't be able to see on campus anyway. So with that, I'll discuss the first 2 buildings, both of which, spoiler alert, were destroyed by a fire. And then I'll pass things over to Brandon for the last 2. These buildings were more intentionally torn down. And because we don't have a lot of time, we are going to go straight through all 4 buildings, and then we'll answer whatever questions we have time for at the end. Okay. So we're going to get started with the middle building here today. Construction on the middle building began in 1835 for the intended purpose of housing the Geneva Medical College. It got its name as a result of its location between Geneva and Trinity Halls, making it obviously and quite literally the middle building. At the laying of the cornerstone in 1835, Professor Edward Cutbush, Dean of the Medical Faculty, declared, "I regret that the restricted funds with which this building is commenced will not afford you an opportunity of raising one worthy of its location. I most sincerely wish that we could have been enabled to render this establishment an ornament to the village, but we must be content with a plain building." 40 feet by 60 feet and 3 stories high, the construction of the building did not go smoothly and was in fact not completely finished when the medical college began occupying it. In 1842, the medical college moved out of the middle building and into a new building that had been constructed further north on South Main Street near Pulteney Park. It was in this new building that Elizabeth Blackwell attended classes when she came to campus in 1847. So she did not attend classes in the middle building. The middle building, meanwhile, was remodeled for college use. The president had an office near the entrance on the first floor. The library was moved to a large south room on the second floor, and the remaining rooms were used for classes. The basement was a sort of mixed purpose room, having been used as a chapel from 1842 to 1851 and a gymnasium from 1851 to 1856. In 1856, though, the basement was divided into 2 rooms for the campus literary societies. By 1872, the basement was being used for additional library storage, though some of the athletic rings from its gymnasium days were still hanging in 1880. The middle building even fulfilled a residential purpose for a time, with the janitor and his wife living in a portion of the building in the 1870s. The building slowly deteriorated, and with that came talk of replacing it. There was a long fissure in the western wall, and classes would have to be canceled if it was too cold. Also, the whole building would shake when the bell on the roof was rung. This brings us to the early morning hours of November 19th, 1885, when a stove on the 3rd floor ignited the adjacent woodwork. Mark Wellington Way, class of 1886, was the first to notice the fire when a strong wind blew smoke into his Trinity Hall room in the building next door. Realizing what was happening, he raised the alarm, and the boys began evacuating the building with their clothes and furniture. Burning embers had ignited Trinity Hall's roof in several places, and a group of students, led by Frederick S. Oliver, class of 88, climbed with pails of water to put them out. Meanwhile, Henry Irving Beers, also the class of 88, was speeding down to inform the fire department as fast as a bicycle could carry him. Knowing that Trinity Hall exists to this day, you know that it was saved from the fire, although at times it seemed like it might share the same fate as the middle building on that November morning. Meanwhile, a dozen or so students ran into the burning middle building under the direction of a faculty member to save as many books as possible, something I don't think we would encourage today. As if running into a burning building wasn't crazy enough, the chaplain and a math professor were even overheard arguing over which books to save. The fire raged from 5 until 7:30 that morning when it was finally brought under control. The wet, muddy crowd that had gathered began to disperse, and Mrs. Potter, the president's wife, served the firemen coffee. The fire left the building completely gutted. Only 6,000 or so of the 15,000 books were saved. The college sent out an appeal, and books and money were sent in from alumni and community members, proving from the very beginning how amazing our alums and community are. To this day, the library still has books which survived this fire in our collections. One such book is Benjamin Hale's 1595 Bible that is visibly charred around the edges. The ruins remained for months, and the winter wind pulled charred pages from the ashes and blew them around campus. The students jokingly referred to these floating pages as the circulating library. When the rubble was finally cleared away, the workers found the cornerstone filled with items, including a rose encased in glass, long since deteriorated. With it were the instructions to present it to, quote, the prettiest girl living in this country in the year 4000. According to the Hobart Herald, the cornerstone items were thrown into the deepest part of the lake, where some unfortunate fishermen may draw them up hereafter and uncork a cloud of intestine strife for the community. Other remnants of the building have been found on the site where it once stood on campus. Burnt wood and bricks were found when the flagpole and memorial bench that now occupy that space were installed. And in 1984, Professor Irene Nicholas's Intro to Archaeology course conducted a dig and found bits of melted glass, brick, mortar, and pottery. So now we're going to continue on towards the second building in our lineup today, which is Alumni Hall. The cornerstone for Alumni Hall was laid in 1886, and construction continued until 1888 with some materials from the middle building, which we just discussed, and had burned down a couple years earlier, being used for the rear wall. The building stood roughly in the area of where Eaton Hall stands today, and it was funded with donations from the Alumni Association and would be the location for future annual alumni banquets. When finished, Alumni Hall was 4 stories tall and measured 88 by 27 feet. The first 2 floors contained a gymnasium. The 3rd floor was classrooms, which could be opened to create a hall for the alumni meetings. And the 4th floor held a museum and mineral cabinets. At the ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone, Colonel C.J. Wright spoke on the, quote, importance of gymnastics in a college education. Baseball, boating, etc. afford exercise for the best athletes, but the gymnasium will make athletes out of those who are excluded from the popular sports. Despite the space for a gymnasium, there were issues with it from the start. It took more than a year before proper equipment was installed. Once the equipment for the gym was installed, there were constant appeals in the Hobart Herald for students to use the facility, though not many did besides the baseball team when the weather was unfit for them to train outdoors. One common complaint was that the gymnasium didn't have a running track. By 1896, plaster was falling from the ceiling and students were complaining that the gym was too cold to use in winter. The only heat source was a single coal furnace in the center of the room. Poor ventilation meant that the gym was usually full of smoke and coal dust, certainly far from ideal conditions in which to exercise. An article in the 1896 issue of the Hobart Herald posed the question, cannot something be done towards improving the condition of the gymnasium? Not particularly in the way of apparatus, but in the matter of ventilation. It is simply impossible for a student to take exercise and derive any benefit from it while the air in the gymnasium is so foul. We harp enough upon the need of gymnastic exercise, but we harp in vain when such an important element as pure air is lacking in the gym. Students go there for exercise, but are driven out by the coal gas which fills the hall. The space was declared unsafe for gymnasium in 1901, understandably so. By 1908, Alumni Hall was used only for storage of college property. In March 1915, Alumni Hall was used for the unique purpose of housing student Frank H. Andrews, class of 1916, while he quarantined with scarlet fever, quarantining being a little bit more familiar to us these days than they would have been maybe a year or so ago. Barely 3 months later, in the early hours on June 17th, the building caught fire. The fire had been discovered by Dean Turk, who resided in a building on South Main Street, close to Alumni Hall. He sent an alarm. However, by the time the firemen arrived, the blaze had traveled up the wooden stairway and all 3 floors were on fire. At one time, the fire seemed to have complete control when it had filled all floors and shot out of all the windows. Under the watchful eyes of a small crowd of primarily students that had gathered, the firemen put out the flames in a relatively short period of time. The Hobart Herald wrote about the building Sunday morning at about 2:30 o'clock. The old Hobart Gymnasium caught fire, and before the flames were extinguished, it had received such a scorching that it must be at last torn down. For several years condemned as unsafe, it has been an eyesore on the Hobart campus, and its destruction brings no regret to anyone concerned. The ruins, though, remained for several months and were finally removed in the fall. So with that, that covers our first 2 buildings. So I'm going to pass things off to Brandon now, who will continue with the barracks.
Thanks, Tricia. In 1946, with so many returning veterans attending school on the GI Bill, Hobart enrollment doubled from 400 to 800. At that time, the only Hobart dormitories were Geneva and Medbury halls, as well as the fraternity houses and a couple of small houses. There was nowhere near enough space for 800 students. For the summer, the colleges temporarily put incoming Hobart students in Comstock Hall and scrambled to find housing. Fortunately, the Sampson Naval Training Center on the east side of Seneca Lake was closing down and selling off its equipment and buildings. Through the Federal Housing Authority, the colleges purchased 5 barracks and a small cafeteria building. The barracks were disassembled and shipped to campus, where they were rebuilt between the Quad and St. Clair Street in the current location of the Mini Quad and Science Complex. They had originally been built in 1940 and had seen 5 years of hard use. 3-story wood frame structures with tar paper walls, the barracks had poor plumbing and insulation, which had to be replaced. In December, they were still being worked on, with students living in them with no hot water. The students complained that they had to keep moving from room to room as the construction team finished their work, and at first, the only furniture the students had were beds. No other furniture was available as nationwide production was still transitioning from a wartime economy. But by the beginning of the next year, they had tables to use as desks. The college hoped to at least have the cafeteria finished in time to give the students a holiday dinner, but due to further shortages, it opened on February 10th, 1947. The barracks were immediately a target of complaint and ridicule from the students. A cartoon in the Herald from March 1948 shows the barracks with dirty windows and peeling tar paper walls surrounded by mud. A wind-blown dead tree and an angry crow give the image an air of menace. The caption quotes from that year's college catalog, which says, quote, "Dormitory facilities in college buildings include all essential features for comfort and convenience," end quote. The rushed construction at the end of the year meant that no landscaping had been done, and the area around the barracks became a mud hole come spring. In a 1949 Herald article called "Mud Be Our Destiny," the editor wrote that the area around the barracks was the most offensive spot on campus. They also wrote that, quote, "A little paint, and at least on the inside, would make life happier for the students who lived there." That summer, the colleges painted the interior walls yellow, blue, gray, and green instead of olive drab, and new grass was planted. The colleges even supplied sheets when the students had previously had to bring their own. The cafeteria had sanitation issues and closed in 1948 after operating under heavy losses. It was shortly thereafter reopened by Harry Hunk Anderson, Willie Laughlin, and Bill Scandling as a private enterprise, which would eventually become Saga. The barracks were always meant to be temporary, and the administration worked to replace them as quickly as possible. President Brown was quoted in the Herald that, quote, in a time of mounting competition for college enrollments, the barracks were considered by the Office of Admissions and students to be the greatest single obstacle to the attraction of new students," end quote. In 1951, the colleges had raised and borrowed enough money to build Durfee, Bartlett, and Hale halls and the new student union, which is now known as Gulick. 4 of the barracks and the cafeteria were demolished. The final barrack was kept as an administration building and was used for professors' offices, classrooms, and to store books during library renovations. It was also the first home to the ROTC when it came to campus in 1951. In 1954, some students from Elford College snuck on campus and painted Elford in big white letters on the side of the last barrack. Although the maintenance department repeatedly painted over it, the white paint would always bleed through the green. It was still there 4 years later when the building was finally removed to make room for Lansing and Eaton halls. The Herald lamented that, quote, "The campus will not be the same without that green eyesore." And now on to everyone's favorite, the Twin Oaks. In 1944, Arthur and Pauline Mearns moved into 81 Hamilton Street, the yellow house on the corner of Hamilton and Pulteney, which would later be known as the Twin Oaks condominiums. Like many of the residents of Hamilton Street, they operated a tourist home there. In 1946, Pauline was looking out her back window at the empty field behind her house and decided to build a tea room, quote, "where the students of our college could pass the quiet hours of the day." According to the Herald, Pauline and Art, her husband, went out onto the lot, took their staff in hand, and proclaimed, "Here will be Twin Oaks." The name came from two large oak trees on the property. There had originally been 3 until one was removed in the 1920s. In 1951, another split in a windstorm and damaged the Mearns house, which meant that there were only 2 oaks at the Twin Oaks for the first 4 years of its existence. By the time the City Planning Board approved its construction in 1947, the plans for the Twin Oaks had transformed from a tea room into a coffee shop and restaurant with apartments on the 2nd floor. The Herald wrote, quote, "Instead of the tinkling of delicate Dresden cups and saucers, there is the epitome of modern college relaxation, the roar of the jukebox, the knock of the pinball machines, the shadows of television, the chug-a-lug of beer, and the gentle reverberation and echo of songs of the long American tradition. Occasionally, a student who has homework to do is seen drinking a cup of coffee with just a little cream." The restaurant quickly became a favorite spot of Hobart and William Smith students and was advertised in the Herald as the place where boy met girl and Hobart met William Smith. Pauline, or Ma Mearns, as she became known to the students, became a trusted confidant. Everyone told her their sorrows, and she could always be depended upon for a consoling reply. On the first anniversary of the business, the Mearns threw a party, and over 1,500 slices of cake were served, and in the first 2 years of business, she received letters and postcards from alums in 11 countries and 7 states. The chef at the Twin Oaks during this time was Clyde C. Mathis. Clyde had worked previously as a chef at Sampson Navy and Air Force Base and the American Legion. He worked at the Oaks from when they opened in 1948 to 1968, when he took a job working for Saga. He retired in 1980. In the early 1950s, several WEOS programs broadcast from the Oaks. In 1951, Breakfast at the Oaks aired every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 to 9 a.m. The following year, in response to student complaints that WEOS was, quote, dull and lifeless, the Twins at the Oaks with George Earhart and Noel Fagan began broadcasting. They would interview people in the restaurant and play records described as different. WEOS said that the show was, quote, unclassified and beyond description. Pauline Ma Mearns passed away in 1952, and Art continued to run the Oaks with his friend Ed McCracken. The Twin Oaks became well known for their carry-out service, which was a relatively new concept at the time, and for Chicken in the Rough, which they first advertised in 1952. A precursor to the carry-out service was the Hobart Student Service, which in 1950 would deliver food to the dormitories between the hours of 9 and 11 at night, except on Saturdays. For the 3rd anniversary of the carry-out service in 1955, the Twin Oaks offered a special 6-pound pail of fried chicken with 2 pounds of French fries for $4.75. By 1955, the Oaks was serving up to 2,000 burgers a week, and Art said he considered himself a branch of the Lincoln Rochester Trust Company as he was cashing over 200 checks a week. Over a dozen couples had become engaged since they opened, and the restaurant was often the scene of fraternity hijinks. Pledges would be tasked with obtaining waitresses' names and phone numbers. Various undergarments would be found on the coat rack and make their way into the lost and found. 2 pledges tried to carry one of the pinball machines out the front door. Another jumped up on the counter and started dancing, and another came in dressed as a woman with a goat on a leash. In 1958, Art Mearns retired at the age of 59, and the restaurant was run for a short time by Marie Sigler. In 1960, the Venuti Restaurant Corporation purchased the Twin Oaks. The Venuti family had long been in the restaurant business in Geneva. Joseph had opened Venuti's restaurant on Wadsworth Street, commonly known as the Old Man's. His sons Dominic and Rocco had worked there and at the tavern located at 282 Exchange Street. In the late 1950s, Dutch and Rocky, as they were known, were running the Little Brown Jug, but when their lease on that building was not renewed and local residents resisted their efforts to build a new restaurant on East North Street, they purchased the Oaks. The Herald printed a photo of the 2 brothers smiling, smoking cigars, and pouring Soylax cleaner into a stock pot. The article wrote, quote, "That's the way they are, 2 spicy guys." In 1962, Rocky moved back to working at the tavern, leaving Dutch the sole operator of the Oaks. Rocky later became manager of the Lafayette Inn and sadly passed at the age of 39 in 1969. Dutch was much loved by the students who frequented the Oaks. The Geneva Times called him an unofficial president, dean, father, confessor, and friend. He even used to bail students out of jail on occasion. He said, quote, "They're all pretty good kids, you know. That doesn't excuse hell raising, but it helps put it into perspective." He had a large collection of business cards, postcards, and letters from alums, and could tell stories about each of them. In 1974, Dutch retired on the advice of his doctor and sold the Oaks to Frank Michael, class of '62. Sean Butler, the Hobart alumni director, organized a retirement party for him. Dutch spent his retirement with his thoroughbred racehorses and his wife and 6 children. He passed in 1977 at the age of 49. In 2018, members of the classes of 1972 donated a plaque honoring Dutch Venuti and the Twin Oaks, which can be found in the flower bed in front of the college's sign. For the next 12 years, from 1974 to 1986, the Twin Oaks continued to be a social center of campus under Frank Michael, but all things must come to an end. 3 factors led to the eventual closing of the Twin Oaks: problems with nearby residents, the desire of the colleges to have a proper entrance to campus, and the raising of the drinking age from 18 to 21. A busy bar in the middle of a residential area often led to problems. There had been complaints from neighbors about noise and drinking on the street since at least 1975, and in 1976, Frank Michael was denied the license to expand the building by the Ontario County Planning Board. His request brought, quote, "strong opposition from some neighbors unhappy with what they called restaurant-generated noise and clutter." These tensions came to a head in the fall of 1980 as the residents of Pulteney Street attempted to sue the colleges over the behavior of some students. They complained of yelling, fighting, vandalism, and theft as students returned from the Oaks late at night. One resident claimed that she was required to call the police up to 4 times a night each weekend. Around the same time, the colleges hired site planners and architects Zion and Breen to study campus and suggest improvements. The firm wrote in the winter of 1980, "The present entrance to the campus from Hamilton Street is highly inappropriate, a small side street lined with a motley mixture of residential and commercial structures. Especially unattractive is the small restaurant bar fronted by a weedy parking lot." Both of these problems were solved in 1981 when the colleges bought the Oaks, 81 Hamilton, as well as 8 other properties on Hamilton and Pulteney Streets, including the homes of the litigious neighbors. 81 Hamilton, the Twin Oaks condominiums, was demolished, and the Oaks was leased to Michael on a year-to-year basis. The colleges initially intended to demolish the Oaks and build an inn or hotel, but these plans languished for a few years without materializing. During these years, there was constant speculation about the closing of the Oaks. Save the Oaks t-shirts were made, and rumors about its impending destruction were printed in the Herald. In 1985, the drinking age was raised from 18 to 21, effectively eliminating half of the Oaks' business. The colleges chose not to renew the lease with Frank Michael, the Twin Oaks was closed, and its contents were auctioned off. Oaks beer mugs soon appeared for sale in the Herald for only $10. The building was demolished on July 28, 1986. The corner was landscaped and a berm was built and planted with trees. In 1990, the college's sign, a gift of Douglas F., class of 51, and Anna T. Miles, and the classes of 1988 was installed. The Twin Oaks continues to be loved and remembered by generations of Hobart and William Smith students. It is honored by the Oaks tent at reunion each year, where the restaurant's iconic sign frequently makes an appearance. In September 1986, Elizabeth Foy, editor-in-chief of the Herald, wrote the following as part of a larger editorial about the demolition of the Oaks. Quote, "The Oaks was a place for students to get away from campus, even if the geographical distance was less than 100 feet from actual HWS turf. Once inside, the academic pressures virtually receded into some faraway abyss. Of course, no one can deny the fact that the Oaks was a bar. Utter libation was a frequent endeavor encountered by many hapless students. But the Oaks was much more than that. It was a place of our own. There was much more to that place, and it was that, not just an ugly building on a corner with floors turned spongy from too much spilled beer. The Oaks was, for all intents and purposes, a happening." If you would like to see more photos of the Twin Oaks, we have created an online exhibit, which you can access from the library's webpage.
Thanks, Brandon. All right, that brings us to the end of our prepared remarks for today. You can see in the upper right corner, we have the library's website, so you can go check out that digital exhibit. And we do have some time for questions, so we're going to try to cover as many of those as we can today, either about the presentation or archives in general. And I'm sure many of you have some fantastic stories about time spent at the Oaks. So I do want to mention quickly that while we don't have time to sit here and hear all your wonderful stories today, we do want to hear them. So if you do have stories you'd like to share about your time at the Oaks or on campus in another location, or you have photos or anything like that, and you would like to get in touch with us, you can contact us at the archives@hws.edu email, and we can start a dialogue about how you can get your stories or whatever else you may have to share with us to the archive so we could add it to our collections. So with that, what questions can we answer for you?
Tricia, I see one in the chat from Gregory Rideout 95. What's the small building in the quad next to the barracks?
All right, I'm guessing that's from a previous slide. So let's travel up a way.
While you're traveling, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Is this we think this building? Is this what we're asking about?
Yes, that one.
That's
okay.
The cafeteria.
Okay,
so the 5 here are the barracks where they were residential, and then this smaller building was still part of the barracks complex and was the cafeteria.
So are there other questions? Use the chat or just unmute yourself and ask.
Wow, were we that thorough?
Yeah.
Actually, I have not a question, but just an observation that when I was at Hobart in the early 70s, Bartlett, Hale, and Durfee were still known as the Barracks. And I wondered if that were still the case. I mean, they kind of looked kind of barrack-like to us, you know, built in a little horseshoe and with a small quad in front. But everybody still referred to them as the Barracks.
That's interesting. I have not heard of that. Now that you mention it, I can kind of see it. It does make sense, especially in a sort of period where the Barracks had just been there. As far as I know, I don't believe the students call those buildings the Barracks any longer, but maybe. Yeah. But thank you. That's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, thanks.
And Brandon, there's a question. I've got to scroll back up here. Any information about Brent House, and can you repeat where we access photos of the Oaks?
Yeah, so the photos of the Oaks, the exhibit can be accessed from the library's website, which is library.hws.edu. And you should see a photo right on that page of the Oaks. And if you just click on that, it'll bring you to the exhibit. And for Brent House, which Brent House? We do have information on the original one on South Main, and then there was the second one, which was on Pulteney. We do have more on the original one on South Main. We have, I believe, a group of alumni who lived there created a scrapbook, and so we have those photos and remembrances, and also their correspondence from when they were putting that together.
Thank you. There's a question from Christine Janis. Did I miss the question where the medical school moved near the park? I'm not quite sure I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, so the middle building was the original home for the medical college. But in 1842, they built a new building further away from the heart of campus, of the Hobart campus, if you will. And it was down the street closer to Pulteney Park. And if I remember correctly, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where the historical marker is.
Yes.
Yes. So if you're traveling on South Main and you see that historical marker commemorating the medical college, and I believe Elizabeth Blackwell specifically, that's that second medical building. So that's the distinction between those two. Does that clarify?
Hopefully. I'm struck by the first two buildings being destroyed by fire. It must bring panic to anybody who manages the physical facilities here. Thank goodness it's not so common anymore.
Well, especially when you look at when you look at the space where the middle building stood, it doesn't seem like a particularly large space. So you know those buildings were very close, and you could see how it could easily travel from one building to the next. So thank goodness we only lost the one building in that fire.
Yeah. Brandon, did you have more to add to that?
I was just going to say it's a good thing we don't heat our buildings with coal fires anymore.
Yeah,
at least in each room.
What can you say about the building that had all the students standing in the windows and their clashier signs? That looked pretty dangerous and scary.
In the middle building ruins?
Mm-hmm.
This photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we know much about this photo other than that it is in the burned out ruins, and you can see the students sort of tagging the building with their class years and different signs.
I don't think their mothers would have approved, but
no, college shenanigans.
It makes you wonder how they got up to the second and third floor if the inside was all burnt out.
That's wild.
I also don't know that their mothers would have approved of them running into a burning building. And as wonderful as it was that they saved the books that they did, that could have turned out disastrous as well.
There's lots of thanks for your presentation in the chat. And Paul Johnson says, thank you. A graduate of 1880 became the rector of our church long ago, and I had never seen pictures of the middle building.
Yeah, it's a rather plain building like was described at the Lane of the Cornerstone, but there is something charming about it, I find. Maybe not in the picture that's currently on the screen, but in some of the others, it's just very simple and its design, and there's a certain elegance to that, I think. Especially when you take the three buildings together in a single shot. There's something nice about the way the three buildings go together.
Are there other questions out there?
Was another question from Gregory Rideout, 95. Gregory, I think right now, the only residence hall on campus for Hobart men is Geneva Hall, which I think traditionally has been Hobart men, and that's the one that remains all men.
Oh, here's that. Lots of kudos, great presentation, love the middle building. Is Medbury now co-ed, is the question I see. I believe so.
Medbury, yes, I believe Medbury is co-ed now.
People are asking for more of these historic presentations in the future, so.
Yes, Tricia and Brandon, we're making some more work for you.
We are thrilled that people have an interest in the history of the colleges. So I'm sure we can find more wonderful, fascinating topics to share with all of you.
Here's is Superdorm co-ed. That one I know is definitely is a yes.
Yes, that's co-ed.
What are some of your favorite pieces in the collection, you two? What do you just are so great? What are you so grateful that we have?
I will say the 1595 Bible I referenced in the middle building fire with the charred edges is quite a piece. It's a very large Bible, and you really can, I mean, as soon as you see it, there's no questioning that it's charred. So the fact that it kind of carries that double history of being an older volume and then also having survived this fire, I think makes it a really stunning piece.
Mm-hmm.
But we have lots of great things. We have thousands of photographs. I mean, we really had to limit ourselves in this presentation on how many photos we shared, just so the file would open. But there are some really stunning photos, everything from, you know, architecture of the buildings to students enjoying the campus in some way or another, black and white photos, color photos, drawings, just, they go on, and they're so wonderful to look at.
Yeah, we have some like early Kodachrome slides and some glass slides, and seeing color photographs of the 40s and 50s is really great to see campus at that time.
Is there something people should know about accessing the archives online that maybe people don't know?
We do have a website, and you can access it from the library's site. So if you go to the library.hws.edu website, there's a green bar that goes across the top, and there's an entire menu for archives and special collections. And we do have several digital collections. So there's a collection of historical photographs, which is like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the photos we have, but there's some wonderful photos in there, including some of these very old ones. And then there's all the yearbooks are up. So those are fascinating to look through. The newspapers, the Herald newspapers, they're super fun to look through. And we also have digital exhibits. So Brandon mentioned the most recent one we have on the Twin Oaks, but there are many other digital exhibits that we have. Pulteney Street throughout the years, buildings that never existed. So kind of a sister topic to this one, if you will. So they are buildings that were proposed or planned that never actually came into existence. early life at William Smith, astronomy at HWS, computers at HWS. There's some really fascinating topics in there, all with images. Brandon creates most of our exhibits and they're wonderful and really kind of tell the story of whatever topic we're exploring. So check those out. There's some really fun information there. So there's some great things there. And of course, when we return to the normal times, we will welcome you back in person. We like when people come to see us. We like visitors. We like to share the history we have. We've had to operate a little differently, obviously, over the past year because of the pandemic, but hopefully before long, we can open our doors again and welcome you all back and you can come see some of these cool things in person.
That's terrific. Thank you. Other questions? We still have a few more minutes available. Well, Tricia and Brandon, thank you so much. Oh, can we send items to you as a question from Jared Whedon?
Yes, in all capital letters. Yes, so our collections don't grow nearly as fast without you. We get items in two different ways. One, we get the official records. We get the items that the colleges produce themselves. So Board of Trustee records and President's records and communications records. That's how we get a lot of photos and things like that. The official emails that go out, which of course took place of the actual physical notices that would have gone out. But we also get stuff from alums, wonderful alums who have great collections of times that they spend on campus with their friends and in their classes. And that sort of tells what I consider the unofficial story, the student story. And that is every bit as important as the official records. To hear how your experiences were is priceless. And I will tell you, the students who use our archives today absolutely love to go through alums' photos and papers. It's so fun because they realize how much they have in common with all of you. I heard one student one year, she was researching, I think she was reading through Daisy Weeks Buckholtz's diaries from when she was a student in the first class of William Smith. And she just all of a sudden exclaimed, "She was just like me. I like to snack when I study too." And so to hear how they connect with past generations of alums is really quite remarkable. And also to see how the campus grows and changes, it's all just extremely important. So if you have anything and you think it would be well kept, I can tell you it will be well kept in the archives. If you feel like you are ready to part with it and would like to send it our way, we are here to receive those. So you can send us an email to the archives@hws.edu email address. Let us know what we have. We can start talking about how you can send it here. And we can be that permanent safe home for your memories.
Thank you so much. Yes, let's unmute. Is everyone unmuted now, Teresa? Mute. We want to say thank you so much.
Well, thank you all of you for attending. It's wonderful to see such a full house of people at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning and get this reunion weekend further kicked off after the president's remarks yesterday. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much, Tricia and Brandon. Well done.
Thank you.